Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and today I'm going to be doing the first and what I hope to become a series of podcasts called Hammer the Hammer, where you hammer me with all of your burning questions, and I provide some sort of a soothing answer. Now, I've already gotten a couple of questions that I'm going to be using from Instagram, but you can send them through Instagram, through Facebook, carrier pigeon, whatever you'd prefer, and I will try to give a concise and helpful response. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Something I've wanted to do for quite some time, in no small part due to the fact that I just like the name. I think it sounds cool. And because, I get asked a lot of very good questions, and the answers to them I think would be helpful to a lot more people. So we're going to dive into that in just a second. One thing I should mention is that a lot of the answers to many of your questions can be answered by action. And a lot of times when it comes to taking action, you are going to be better off doing stuff that you should have been doing the whole time. And a great example of this would be working on your gait pattern. And a lot of people think, this is not a whole lot of fun or whatever, but probably one of the fastest ways that I've ever seen for people to get stronger, to move better, to get more resilient, is to engage in gait pattern movements such as crawling, carrying, and so on, that are very strength oriented and will help you to get strong without interfering with the rest of your training. So if you want to do that, I recommend you go to 9minutechallenge.com and get my, as you might imagine, 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. You can put it at the end of your current workouts. You can use it at the beginning. You can do it as a standalone program. But I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it. A lot of people have told me they've gotten quite strong from doing it, gotten a lot fitter, lost some flab as well. So it is a good all-around program. I highly recommend it. And like I said, it can be used in conjunction with whatever else you are doing. So let us begin. Names of the people who have reached out have been changed or have been reduced. So I'm not going to say the whole name in order to protect the innocent. All right. So first question comes from a gal named Natalie. Says, I've been doing calisthenics for 3 years now. Great progress, but bored. Strict routine doesn't allow much variation in the program or room for play. So I don't want to stop altogether, and I want to add in some kettlebell work. And previously, her question was adding in kettlebell work to what she's doing with calisthenics without burning herself out. Well, first things first, one of the things that I would say is that it is very possible that and I'm not a nutrition expert, so I'm not trying to give nutrition advice, but this is just purely experiential. But if you're finding that you add a little bit of volume in your training or a new stimulus and you're just getting very burned out, especially with something that's generally speaking a little bit easier on the nervous system, like kettlebells versus barbell training, for instance, which is notoriously rough on the nervous system, then what I would recommend is you probably should eat a little bit more. And in particular, some protein would probably go pretty well. But aside from that, based off of what she's saying, it sounds like she kind of wants a change in her program, particularly because she's interested in maybe getting a little bit more variety and what have you. Now, she has a coach. And so, of course, I said, well, you should, or she had a coach, I should say. So I would recommend you follow what your coach says, and that if you do add anything, you get it approved. But I think she's kind of working on her own right now. So the recommendation that I would make, there are a couple of different options, and you just have to figure out which one's going to work best for you. Now, one of them, the one that I initially suggested to her, would be to do skill work before your main work. So let's say your main calisthenics work is chin-ups, dips, leg raises, and pistol squats, or something along those lines. So then what I would suggest is that if you're going to add kettlebell training to the mix, that it should be treated as skill work. And so the goal is obviously not to make it a quote unquote workout. You're not trying to break a sweat. You're not trying to get in a hard training session, but you're using the fundamental movements to help you either get a little better at them, get more familiar with them, or just maintain your abilities in them. So for instance, the ever ubiquitous swings and get-ups might be a good thing to add at the beginning. And so you might do, it could be as simple as just 1 or 2 get-ups per side. Doesn't have to be a lot. And then a couple of sets of 10 swings could do the trick. And you might vary the weight throughout the week. You might go a little heavier some days, more moderate others, lighter on other days. And you do this with both the swings and the get-ups. And in all likelihood, this is going to be something that'll help. It'll be kind of like an extended warm up. And so you will be doing stuff that you're obviously not warming up directly for, like the pull-ups and dips and what have you. But it will allow you to make sure that you're maintaining some skills in that or learning the skills, and that you still have enough room left over to do your main calisthenics work. Now, the other thing is that if you're looking for a change in your program, but you want to keep doing calisthenics work, you have a couple of options. You have a lot of options, to be quite honest with you, but you do have a couple that I think are particularly useful. Now, one of them would be to split your workouts into A days and B days. So this is a classic approach. Essentially what you do is you'd have one day where you may be devoted to certain exercises and another day where you're devoted to different ones. And if you're working out 3 days a week, your weeks would be cycled as A, B, A, and then B, A, B. So what this means is that, let's say your A days are your calisthenics exercises. So let's go back to what we talked about earlier. Let's say calisthenics days are going to be chin-ups, dips, leg raises, and pistol squats, okay? And then your B days might be kettlebell oriented. So let's say that would be rows, military press, front squats, and swings, for instance. So on your A days, you're going to do all calisthenics work. Your B days, it's going to be all kettlebell work. So week 1, you'd have one kettlebell day and 2 calisthenics days. So A, B, A. Week 2, you're going to have 2 kettlebell days and 1 calisthenics day. So B, A, B. What this will allow, this kind of 2-week cycle, is allows you to get the best of both worlds. And you don't have to worry a whole lot about taking like back off weeks, and you don't have to think too much about it, because each week you're backing off from something. You're either doing less in terms of your kettlebell training or in terms of your body weight training. Now, taking a back off week would still be a smart idea, because obviously if you're pushing a little harder as the weeks go on and you're adding volume and that sort of a thing, you still are going to want to back off. So it doesn't get you off the hook entirely, but it makes it quite a bit easier to avoid burning out with just one method. Now, there is another option, and I got this idea from a great book by Pavel, and it's called Russian block periodization. So the idea with this is that you would do 2-week blocks. And this is something we kind of talked about a second ago, because you've got these 2-week cycles you're going back and forth, ABA and BAB. But with the Russian block periodization, you would focus on one specific thing for 2 weeks, and then for the next 2 weeks, it would be a different thing. And the way Pavel talks about it in his book, which is Return of the Kettlebell, is you'd have blocks of grinds or slow exercises like, military press, squat, deadlift, that sort of a thing. And then a 2-week block of clean and jerks. So it's grind and then explosives. Those are the 2 blocks that you're working with. Other ones that I've heard people use are intensity and volume. So 2 weeks, you might use a higher intensity or more challenging weights or variations of a certain exercise. And 2 weeks, you might go more volume oriented. So it might be more like more of a muscle building approach. So that would be another option. And you could simply do that with calisthenics for 2 weeks and then kettlebells for 2 weeks. Another option, if you want to learn now, and this depends, because Natalie is actually quite a skilled athlete. So, but if you are new to combining kettlebells and calisthenics, or maybe you're just new to kettlebells and calisthenics in general, I'm going to have a book coming out on Amazon called the No BS Kettlebell and Bodyweight Kickstart. There'll be more information on that coming out before too long. So keep your eyes and ears peeled. All right. The next one comes from somebody whose screen name is Piggy with a whole bunch of Y's at the end of it. Not his actual name, in case anyone was unsure. So Piggy says, I'm having a bit of a problem making a program for power with double bells. I think low rate of perceived exertion and rather low volume is the key, but I'm confused about the rest periods and about how much weight to use. Like, are very heavy kettlebells good to use? So what I would say for this, number one, is if you're in that position where you're confused about how to make a program focused around power with double bells, you're probably not ready for using double bells for that purpose. A good metric that I picked up from, I believe it was Brett Jones, who's the chief instructor for Strong First, is to use around 1/3 of your body weight, meaning one kettlebell at around 1/3 of your body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you're going to want to use 24 kilo or 53-pound kettlebell, and you just do the math accordingly. Now, obviously, the whole purpose of power training is to move a weight as quickly as possible. So if you're strong, the third body weight may be not challenging enough, and maybe you need to go up a little bit in weight. As long as you can accelerate the weight very quickly, you should be just fine. But for most beginners, around a third body weight is going to be kind of like the sweet spot, according to Brett Jones and the experience of many people. So what I would recommend, or what I recommended to him, was essentially to keep in mind that, number one, power loves rest, or power loves speed. So you need to be able to move quickly, as I just mentioned, but power also loves rest. So what you'll want to do is, and I'm just reading off what I wrote to him, is you want to make sure that you're using kettlebells that you can accelerate quickly and that you're resting adequately between sets. And as a side note, adequately between sets, it's going to depend on your fitness levels, but I'm a big fan of like on the minute training. And this is especially useful if you're using sort of lowish reps, like if you're doing maybe 5 reps, something like that. On the minute training works awesome. You could probably go up to 10. I don't think that would be a problem for most people. But if you're going up to, for example, like 20 swings, I think that's a little bit more in the endurance field. I just don't really see that as being much power oriented. Between 5 and 10 reps is usually the sweet spot for people. And then I said, as I just mentioned earlier, general rule is to use a kettlebell no heavier than 1/3 your body weight, at least to begin. And I'll point this out again. As you get stronger and more adept at this stuff, you can certainly go heavier, but initially keep it around 1/3. And you commit to just a few sets of 5 to 10 reps, resting for a minute or more, and then repeat. And probably best to start with low reps. So like, let's say we're going to start with just 5 sets of 5 reps. And again, the focus is power. So you're not trying to get in a whole ton of work. You're trying to just really explosively move this kettlebell. So let's say you do something like 5 sets of 5 swings on the minute, and then you'll move on from there. So what you might do is you do 5 swings, rest for the remainder of the minute. Top of the second minute, do another 5 swings, so on and so forth. And then what you want to do as time goes on is just try to get roughly the same amount of work done in fewer sets. So it might be your next workout, you're going to do sets of 6, sets of 7, and you end up working up to, let's say, 3 sets of 10 reps. And then from there, you can work on adding more volume. So you might pick a new amount of volume. So rather than 25 to 30 reps, maybe you're going to set it at like, let's say 50 total reps. So you might go back down to 5 to begin, and then just do 5 explosive swings on the minute, every minute for 10 minutes. So that's going to get you 50 reps. Work your way up to 10 sets of 5, and then keep doing this and recycling it until you get to 10 sets of 10 with a given weight, making sure that you're keeping explosive power and adequate recovery your number one focus. Now, obviously, I didn't write all of what I just said. I'm just kind of expanding on what I wrote. And before I get the question, you can also do this with high pulls. You can do this with snatches, things like that. But I would say initially, if you're somewhat of a beginner, and even if you're not, I think it would be better to start off with swings and then parlay that into more intermediate and advanced ballistic exercises as time goes on. Because I just don't think that you need to, really overdo it in terms of your trying to push yourself forward too quickly. If you really get good at the swings portion of it, everything else just really falls into place. But you knew that. That's easy. All right. Now there's another one from a screen name of Popeye the Sailor, who had asked about having plateaued with his pull-ups. He had plateaued at about 14 reps, which is respectable, by the way. 14 reps is nothing to sneeze at. But if you want to get better, what I recommended to him, is that you want to, number one, increase your volume. And there are a couple of things, actually. I want to give a more expanded example of this. So first and foremost, a lot of times, as I mentioned just a second ago with swings, if you get good at the basic stuff, the more intermediate and advanced stuff becomes a lot easier. So I can just give you one example. I had an online consultation recently with a gentleman in Israel, and he wanted to work on the kettlebell snatch. So the first thing that we did is we looked at his swing and gave him some pointers on how to fix it, and then snatches became much easier. So the same approach is true if we're talking about something like, let's say pull-ups. So think about what movements are even more basic than pull-ups. For instance, I would say bodyweight rows, face pulls, things like that. These are things that are important to keep in rotation because they kind of set a good foundation for strong pull-ups. Now, that aside, let's talk, we'll call these like prerequisites. You get the prerequisites aside. If you're keeping those in, and incidentally, by the way, I think other good things to consider would be assistance exercises for pull-ups. These two things, rows and face pulls, could be good assistance exercises, but I'm going to talk about a few others in just a moment. But the next thing to look at would be the volume or total number of reps. And for that, what I would recommend is over time, you just slowly increase the volume. And as you're doing that, I'm a big believer in manipulating certain variables to help make sure that you're not working yourself toward overuse injuries, which are unfortunately very common in the calisthenics world because people like to do high reps and they don't necessarily do enough variety when they really should be. So when it comes to pull-ups, variety would be, I would say, comes in two forms. So, well, I guess you could say three. There would be the style of pull-up you're doing. There would be the hand position and then the implement that you're using. So let's start off with the style of pull-up. You might do some pull-ups gymnastic style and more in the hollow position. Others would be more like standard style, which is kind of a hybrid between the gymnastics position or the gymnastic style pull-ups and bodybuilder style pull-ups. And as you might imagine, the third style would be bodybuilder pull-ups. So hollow position pull-ups are where your body's in the hollow position. The bodybuilder position would be quite the opposite. It's you're really extended, really opening your chest wide. And yeah, everybody's seen it. You know, it's like the ubiquitous pull-up that you see in gyms. And then the other one would be, again, a kind of a mix between the two of those. And I think that if you're doing that, and then you're also changing up your grip. So sometimes it might be underhand, a chin-up grip. Other times neutral, sometimes overhand. Changing the width of the grip. For overhand in particular, you can do wide, standard, narrow. To some degree with neutral grip, it depends on the implement that you have available, but you can do similarly kind of standard, wide grip. Narrow might be a little bit tough. I mean, it can be done, but for narrow grip, let's say neutral grip pull-ups, you might use a standard pull-up bar and do what's called a baseball bat grip. So you hold the bar like it's a baseball bat. You do your pull-ups like that. And chin-up grip, I would say standard and narrow are probably your best options. Wide grip chin-ups are just, they're not very good on most people's elbows. And then the last thing would be the implement. So sometimes you do them on pull-up bars, sometimes you do them on ropes, sometimes you do them on rings. This is going to help you to get in quite a bit more variety, and it's going to allow you to increase the volume much more easily without having to worry so much about the overuse injury factor. That's not to say that it's not going to be there at all, but it's easier to mitigate it, from my experience, if you're not always doing the exact same thing, the exact same way all the time, and then adding more and more reps onto that, right? Now, then the other thing I would say is that a lot of people have strength imbalances. And this is not true just for pull-ups, this is true for everything. But it might be useful if you do some assistance work to help with your pull-ups. And that could be grip work. It could be direct arm work in the form of like bicep curls. I know that sounds heretical, it's not. These things can help quite a bit because you've got certain muscle groups that even though they're not the primary movers, and the prime movers in the case of the pull-up would be the lats specifically, but there are other muscles that are come into play as well. But a lot of people think, my arms get enough work from doing pull-ups. The reality is they might not be, because pull-ups are not an arm exercise; they're a back exercise. So if you want to focus on your arm specifically and do something that is going to help with the muscles that are supposed to be helping you with the pull-up in a secondary fashion, I would recommend that you put a little time doing some grip work, maybe some direct arm work, bicep work in particular would be very helpful for this. And the same approach applies as well to stuff like a military press squat, so on and so forth. Now, you may not need every conceivable variation of pull-up. You may not need every conceivable implement. You may not have every implement to use. And likewise, you may not need to do a ton of assistance work. You may not even need to do it yet. It may need maybe, months or years in the future where it really becomes something to consider. But all of these things are very helpful for pull-ups. And again, these same principles apply to other exercises as well. The main thing is still going to be the pull-up. Likewise, with if you were going to try to approach this with the military press or anything else, the main thing has to remain the main thing. But these assistance things can be a huge, huge help. And so I hope you will consider this when you're working on your pull-ups. I think you're going to find it to be a much more enjoyable and interesting process. Probably find you build more muscle and more strength doing it like that, and it will be a lot less boring. So this concludes the first episode of Hammer the Hammer. I hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, like I said, feel free to send them my way, and I will maybe, if they're good enough, I will cover them in a future episode. Thank you again for listening, and have fun and have